This is Heartstock Radio. I'm your host, Carol Murphy. And as always, I like to remind you that you can reach us at heartstockradio@gmail.com. You can also find us on social media. We usually post our up-and-coming guests. And speaking of which, this week, our guest is Michael Bowman, and he is an industrial hemp advocate and expert. In just a moment, he'll be with us and tell us all about what he is up to. This is one of my most favorite subjects to talk about. In just a moment, we will be back with Michael. I'm Carol Murphy, your host, and Daniel Hogan is in the studio. We'll be right back. Welcome. This is Heartstock Radio. I'm Carol Murphy, your host, and our guest today is Michael Bowman, and he is a industrial hemp expert, and I'm sure there's many other titles, as with most of our guests these days, it seems. Hi, Michael. How are you?
Oh, good morning, Carol. How are you?
We were just talking about our geography here. You're typically located in Colorado, where I know there's a lot of stuff going on in the hemp world, as there is here in Montana. So let's just start out by kind of talking about hemp in your life.
Well, sure. It's my favorite thing to talk about. So I'm so glad we got together today. I was born and raised on my family's farming and agricultural operations in eastern Colorado, and had the opportunity to really spend a lot of time earlier 20 years ago on soils and sustainability. I was really interested in soil carbon back before carbon sinks were even a thing, and different crops and rotations. And so I had the opportunity in the winter months in our downtime to spend time in Zimbabwe with Alan Savory, who is kind of a world leader on rebuilding soils, regenerating our soils, and really just enjoy Alan's work. And during that time, I spent time in Zimbabwe, and one fateful evening around a campfire, there was a couple from Australia who were spending the evening with us in the campground, and they were sharing their story about being in India just prior to Zimbabwe, and some of the upheaval that was going on with Indian farmers there, as there was somewhat of a forced transition from hemp growing into cotton, GMO cotton. And that upheaval was really leading to a lot of suicides and some very unfortunate kind of social construct issues there. Being a raised Catholic, I've always been drawn to the social justice side of the religion, and I was really concerned about, it really touched me because I had worked on farm bills and have over the span of these last couple of decades, and I knew firsthand just how hard it is to battle the kind of interests that were forcing this kind of change in India. So I got interested in hemp really on a social justice perspective. Our farming operations are far enough west that prior to 1937 and then the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act, which started the demise of the industry, hemp really didn't get a toehold that far west. So I didn't grow up around hemp, didn't grow up around any folklore of hemp. And so it was a real eye-opening experience for me once I started educating myself about the crop based on this Indian story about the plant and what we could do with it, and the sustainability portions around that. Our agricultural operations are over the Ogallala Aquifer. We've been withdrawing unsustainable amounts of water to grow federally subsidized crops like corn for years. Much to the demise of both our soils and our water resources. And so hemp became something to me that was a plausible alternative for our region and just nationally, knowing the history of the plant. So that really started my journey. That little campfire, that little fateful visit around the campfire, and started working in Colorado advocating for the hemp plant in 2006. Then it was a few years before I was really able to focus on that. And in parallel, I've always been involved in around policy, and I've not been an elected official, but advocacy around policy issues around rural sustainability and development. So started that journey in 2006 in Colorado. And we were able to, over a span of 6 years, do a lot of education around the industrial hemp plant. We were part of this Colorado's historic Amendment 64 in 2012, which gave us, as farmers, the constitutional right to grow hemp. And so we were off to the races. I've given you the elevator pitch on that 6 years, but it took a concerted effort to do education and to bring people kind of into the circle of the mysteries of hemp and decades of myths and lies about the plant to really bring some acceptance into the agricultural community. So that led us to that passage of Amendment 64. As you mentioned earlier, Colorado has been the tip of the spear from the beginning. We've been consistently one of the largest states in terms of acreage and just sales, in large part led by our current governor, Governor Jared Polis, who has been a real advocate, has a great vision for what hemp can do for our economy in value-added products. So we're really blessed to have his leadership and the research institutions and the support of the farming community in Colorado around developing the plant.
So I'm just curious, pre-hemp, in your own personal life, did you go to college and get an ag degree, or did you learn everything kind of handed down from generation to generation?
Well, I'm fifth generation of my family. I now have the seventh generation on the way. So a lot of it was, growing up on the back of a tractor and on a horse and doing the things I did growing up. I did attend the University of Arkansas and came back to Colorado and was, active in the day-to-day operations of our family's cattle feeding and irrigated and dryland operations for a little over 20 years, raised my kids there, and then really wanted to dive into policy. Even during those 20 years while I was on the farm, I was the chairman of the planning commission for the county, and always very involved in those kinds of constructs. But I saw the value of good public policy come to fruition when I helped in 2004 pass the Colorado's Amendment 37 campaign, which was a renewable energy mandate, which forced Colorado into a very green direction on our energy, and opened up the doors for our rural communities to have some opportunity to participate in that development. So for me, even to then and today, everything's got to be rooted in good policy, and every good federal policy usually points back and starts with something that's a good state policy, and every good state policy starts with something that happens in your backyard that you can take to a state legislature. So, it's important. I'm really passionate about that part of it. We have to get the policy right, because we lived 8 decades of getting policy wrong with the Marijuana Tax Act of 37 and the Controlled Substances Act and the scheduling in 1969, and we lost 8 decades of opportunity to take the wondrous properties of this plant and turn it into value-added products for a global market. So I use those as the contrast of what's bad policy and what's good policy, and it's certain their effects.
Yes, and I'm hoping we can talk a little bit more as we kind of progress here about the historical aspects of just ag policy in general, but very specifically hemp as well. But I'm wondering, you've mentioned a couple times the properties, when we're trying to grow, say, cotton versus hemp. What is it about hemp that makes it such an amazing plant?
Well, it's really the multidimensional use of that. You have, I call it, it's food, feed, fuel, fiber, bioplastics, building materials. I often say that this plant isn't a silver bullet, but a silver buckshot. And if you have a challenge or a new opportunity, there's probably somewhere on that solution set where some subcomponent of hemp can play a role. It's not a one-trick pony. So it's got such vast potential, and we're seeing that play out today, whether it's the folks who are working in the Hemp Feed Coalition, for animal feed, and we look at the omega oils from that are the byproduct of that of that hemp cake for health and nutrition. We look at the fiber that can be molded into plastic products or turned into a competitive product to and I would say a much more sustainable product to cotton, and the bast that can be used for bioplastics and animal bedding and any number of things. And then you add all of that and added to all that the ability of this plant to absorb enormous amounts of CO2 in a production cycle in a time when we're looking for ways that agriculture can play a mitigating role in climate change. So we've got a lot of opportunity here, and we're much like the soybean. Let's compare this to a soybean crop. 30 years ago, it would be hard to imagine what the soybean market might look like today. Soybeans were relatively new. There wasn't a lot of research. It didn't work everywhere, and it took a sustained, concerted effort, over three to 4 decades, to take that crop in particular and see the amount of things that are being done with it today. We're on somewhat of the same path. We're rediscovering the many things we can do with that plant and the opportunities in a value-added, bioeconomy that we can do with this plant. So I think we'll have a very compressed time frame when we compare the two plants side by side. It's not going to take us 40 years to develop the kind of markets that they have, but similar. Where we started out practically at zero again in 2014 with the Farm Bill opening, and we're quickly trying to tackle policy and infrastructure and markets, and on top of that, in the middle of a pandemic. So we're doing heroic work really on and trying to build this industry, but we've had our headwinds, and we've made some great strides even in light of all of that.
And you had mentioned soil and water before, and the work of Alan Savory. If we compare cotton to hemp, well, why is hemp, or maybe it's not, is hemp really better for capturing carbon, for climate change, and the soil regeneration, basically? Yeah.
Well, I would argue, Carol, that hemp is a far superior product. The challenge we've had is we have a well-orchestrated and funded cotton lobby, which gives them a number of advantages in the marketplace for growing the federal subsidy safety nets and the participation in global markets that we don't have yet. And I'd argue that the embedded carbon in the amount of chemicals that we know that are being used in that industry, once accounted for, show a significant footprint and effect on our CO2 emissions inventory. So what we've got to do is to be able to compete head to head or compete with them. It's hard to say that we would compete with them at this point because they're a mature industry with a number of resources that we do not have. But I would say that an economy that is going to reward products that are sustainable, that are soil building, that are regenerative by nature, and bring a lot of societal benefits with it. That once we're able to capture those values in a functioning marketplace, we'll be able to. Then I'd say I would use the word compete. In the meantime, we're on this road alone from that perspective because we still need policy to get us to that point, and we're a long ways from there yet. We've made 2 good strides in the 2014 and 2018 farm bills on getting the door open and then descheduling. But here we are still in 2021 and still have issues with bankers who don't still nervous about the federal scheduling of cannabis and the mix, and then the mixing of hemp and marijuana in their minds. We have just ordinary issues like that still exist, and not being able to having full access to USDA rural development opportunities as well. We're getting there. We're making strides, but we have a long way to go.
We're going to take that midway point break here. We'll be right back with Michael Bowman and talk some more about hemp. I have so many questions. This is Hard Stock. This is Hard Stock Radio. I'm your host, Carol Murphy. And we're here with Michael Bowman and talking about industrial hemp. You were mentioning, Michael, that, there's so much more that can be done to really encourage the growth of industrial hemp. And some of the rules and regulations, we're so far behind because, like, say, textiles, which is one of my favorite subjects. How can we turn this amazing plant that's good for the soil and uses less water into textiles? Well, we have to have the infrastructure, the machinery, all of which has been, doesn't exist here anymore. So what kind of laws and rules? You mentioned some, I think it sounded like some funding opportunities that some crops have that hemp does not. And how the heck did we get here? That's a whole ball of wax right there.
Well, the short answer on how did we get here is when we conflated hemp and marijuana in the 1969 Controlled Substances Act that Nixon put in place. So that really just was a death knell for us. Prior to that, we had the Marijuana Tax Act in place, and it didn't really outlaw hemp, but it made it nearly impossible to grow, except for that brief period of time during World War II when we had the Hemp for Victory campaign. Hemp, has been pretty much a non-starter for everybody, since 1937, with that exception of those 2 years during the war. So we've gutted an industry over 80 plus years. And at the same time, we've created an entire infrastructure, an entire set of federal safety nets for commodity crops that we have to compete with for the acres, right, to do what we want to do. If we want to have a substantial impact on, lowering agriculture's CO2 emissions and creating the feedstock just to make these products, we're competing with corn and soybean acres and wheat acres and acres that have, are amongst those well supported by federal policy right now and policy that's been in place for decades. So we've got to have a good story. We've got to sell our story to the consumer. I still think the strongest driver for us is going to be an educated consumer. It's shows like your own where we can talk to consumers. So when they say, when you go to the store, look for a hemp blended product, or when you look for omegas, look for something that's hemp derived, or if you're looking for, fill in the blank, help support the industry, because I'm convinced that the generations, the millennials, and particularly in that millennial space, they vote with their pocketbook and they advocate with their purchases. So that's going to be a big part of it to help us get there. I think the market will be able to achieve something that policy won't be able to achieve on its own.
And now that we're on this path, maybe you can share a little bit of what we're already seeing in the way of light at the end of the tunnel, some success stories of folks doing amazing things with hemp.
Yeah, well, we have, I'm going to mention a few. I've just got such admiration for everybody that's in the space advocating. But if you go to Idaho and look at what Matty Mead with Hepatexture is doing, he broke ground on a new facility to do value added with hemp fiber, and Matty's just done an incredible job of advocating for the plant, doing it local, finding that local government support, and he's doing a great job. You look at Chad Rosen, Victory Hemp Foods over in Kentucky. Chad's really been leading the space here with hemp as a food ingredient, and how we can move that into the nutrition space. So those are two examples in I would call the non-CBD world. And then in the fiber space and textile space, you have Barbara Philippone with EnviroTextiles, who's been a champion on textiles for decades. She's just a treasure trove of information. I know Lawrence Serban with Hemp Traders here in California, and Tony DeVeris, who was with a researcher at UC Pomona, I believe. Did some growing trials here in California this year that were successful. So we're inching our way toward understanding and how to grow the plant, but we still have a real gap in infrastructure. And as you'd mentioned earlier, we talked about USDA rural development funds have often been that banker really for rural value-added products. for any number of crops. I do believe that they'll play a significant role in building the infrastructure for hemp. We've had a challenge post 2018 Farm Bill as states have lagged in getting their state hemp plans approved. Until they do so, they can't have access to these USDA funds. And so there's a number of programs we want to tap, but it's just been a somewhat laborious process getting state plans approved so that we're really fully compliant and can tap the fullness of those USDA funds.
You mentioned COVID before. How has COVID hampered or helped here?
Well, we had, we were moving through 2019, and I think we had a lot of inertia, in the industry, as did everybody else in their own respective sectors. But we ended up with overproducing, and when I refer to 2019, we were basically a CBD industry. We're around the edges. We're developing, some of the things I just mentioned with food and fiber and doing some great strides on getting animal feed approved. But basically, we were a CBD industry that way overproduced in 2019. COVID came along. We had a crash in the market dollars. We saw a lot of people close their businesses, consolidate, and so we went through 2020 in large part on the excesses of 2019's production. And in 2021, we still aren't quite geared up yet. I'd give you a perfect example just from my own personal example. We've been working with a number of black farmers in Selma and Dallas County, Alabama, on a project that we'd intended to do in 2020. We saw this as the CBD market in particular, and the high-end food market for as a way to give them some real opportunity in their small plot land there in Alabama. And then we were getting ready to do it in 2020. COVID came along, we couldn't travel. We wanted this to be a success. The market crashed, and we just had to put everything on hold. And we remained on hold even through this year because there were just still too many uncertainties at the beginning of the year. We hope that, we'll be back on track, but it just is one project that is not unlike, I'm sure, many others out there. COVID really upended a lot of plans and have extended them.
And the barriers, are these just, I don't know, have we all been brainwashed to believe that somehow hemp is something other than what it is? I mean, what are the biggest barriers? Sounds like getting money and convincing folks that hemp is what it is.
It is. We have, unfortunately, we had the Reefer Madness campaign that started way back in the 30s, and hemp, just by association, got lumped in. That was further exacerbated with its scheduling along with marijuana as a Schedule I drug in 1969. And so what we've built really is this bureaucratic inertia around lies, right, and myths that is just hard to overcome. And as an example, in 2013, when we passed to Section 7006, the Farm Bill, I had an American flag made for then Congressman Jared Polis, our now governor, to have on the floor when he argued the amendment. As we know hemp? That all. Yes, out of hemp.
And didn't Patagonia make a movie about this?
They did, yes, Harvesting Liberty. Mm-hmm. This was a different flag than the one in the film, but we were able to. I had that made and had it for the congressman, and then of course we won the vote on the amendment. That was in June of 2013, and so I was able to orchestrate getting that flag flown over the Capitol on July 4th. Of that year. And we kept it quiet, and then it broke in the newspapers that there was a hemp flag flying over the Capitol. And it was a story that went around the world. There's some great stories on it. If you just Google my name, hemp flag, you'll have lots to read. But what happened was later that year, the then DEA administrator, Michelle Leonhardt, in a speech to the National Sheriff's Association, said that when she got up on the morning of July 4th and read that the hemp flag was flying over the U.S. Capitol, it was the worst day of her 33-year career as a DEA agent. And she said, I'm against all illegal drugs, even the flag-making kind.
Oh.
Now, I give you that story just to show you, it's illustrative, to show you just the challenges that we have in bureaucracy, and so even after laws are passed through Congress and we've descheduled hemp and we've done state plans and we've moved down the road, we still have these challenges internally in regulatory and bureaucratic scenarios. So you're right. I mean, we've been poisoned, really. The general public has been poisoned over what this plant is. Their minds have been poisoned, and we have in parallel then created an entire safety net system for crops that are less sustainable and ultimately provide probably less opportunity from a value-added perspective than we have. So it's just a little flavor of just when I say we still have headwinds, we've made a lot of headway here, just getting it descheduled, but we've still got a long way to go.
So how might folks find you if they're interested in working in the space or connecting with you?
Oh, sure. My email is the best way to catch me. It's Michael at my last name, Bowman, .ag. And happy to interact with anybody. It takes all of us. It takes a team and a big team, and we've got some great advocates in the space now. But we're going to have to continue to build that advocacy and build our support, and it takes a lot of different talents to do that.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Michael, and thanks for doing what you're doing.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Carol, anytime.
This is Heartstock. We'll be back next week. I'm your host, Carol Murphy. See you then. Peace.
As I went walking.
Heartstock Radio is a production of KBMF 102.5 Butte America Radio. Hear our programs every Friday at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time via livestream at butteamericaradio.org.
This land was made for you and me. I roamed and rambled, and I followed my footsteps through the sparkling sands of the thunder desert. And all around me, a voice was sounding. This land was made for you and me. The sun comes shining, and I was strolling in the wheat fields waving, and the dust clouds rolling. The voice was chanting as the fog was lifting. This land was made for you and me. As I went walking, I saw a sign there, and on the sign it said, no trespassing, but on the other side